It's such a pleasure for me to be here. I am very proud to say this is the second time I've been in this synagogue in 2 days, which is more than I can say for my own religious place of worship recently. So, I'm winning in that, I think. When I'm hearing all these remarkable stories of incredible women, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not that surprised, because I wouldn't be where I was if I had not heard remarkable stories by incredible women, which encouraged me to be where I am. But I do think it deserves recognition. And I think that it's incredible that you all came here today, particularly in today's climate, where you're not supposed to talk to people who don't look and sound like you, to actually hear this. And I hope to also share some of your own experiences. So thank you for that, and thank you for everybody who organized this. Now, I am one of 11 siblings. So where you run into cousins when you walk out, I run into siblings. And my parents immigrated here from Libya in the early 1980s. My father is a general surgeon, and they are incredibly religious parents, very acultural. My family is a proud family of mixed marriages and mixed ideas, but they were religious, and their religion taught me. I remember one of my mom's favorite quotes was that God's mercy is greater than his anger. That was always what she would say to me whenever I did anything wrong. And I did everything wrong. I mean, I was a middle child of 11. I had excuses. Ask any psychologist. I mean, it was acceptable. So that was what I grew up in. That was the environment where I was taught that God was loving and giving and merciful. And in my own family, and I think many immigrant families can identify with this, or children of immigrant parents, you hope that your daily actions and your daily work is worthy of your parents' sacrifice. Every time the line cuts and they can't talk to their parents overseas, every time anything happened, my mom would miss a birthday of her mom's or a holiday, I would say, I'm going to amount to something to make this all worth it. And so for me, the holiest place was not the mosque. It was not a place of traditional worship. It was actually the hospital. My dad was a general surgeon, and the hospital prayer hall had every single person praying in it. I mean, people who had never prayed before were praying in it. Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody would pray in it. Everybody identified that this space, and if those walls could talk, I think they would tell you so much about what faith actually looks like when you remove the politics from it and the economy from it and everybody's different interpretation from it. It is genuinely just a place of hope. That's what my faith has always represented to me, right? When people told me I couldn't do it, I just naturally assumed I could. And a lot of that came from being told that there are things way greater than those people telling me no, and that those things are on my side, right? Be it whatever you believe in, God, spirits, the creator, there's always somebody who has your back. And that's the fact that somebody is all-powerful and all-knowing makes it a lot better. But that was what encouraged me. Now, my father is if you hear those jokes about Arab fathers or immigrant parents who are like, oh, how'd you do in school? And you say, I got a 98, and my dad's like, where's the other 2%? That was my father. So my oldest sister didn't make it easy because she became a plastic surgeon by the time she was 25. So take the most male-dominated surgical field and put her in it, and she excelled. She was like this national superstar, and everybody was telling my dad, your daughter's so amazing. And my dad's like, you see? And I was like, thank you for making the footsteps so huge to fill. And so when I finished high school, I was 15. I had known I wanted to be a doctor since the day I could go to the hospital. I knew that was the way in which I felt I could contribute to the world. I knew that I cared about people, but that I cared about them in a way in which I wanted to tangibly change their life, right? And being a doctor, it's so easy to see right in front of you someone's life completely changed because of something you could do. So I went directly into medical school, and in my final year when I was 21, founded the Voice of Libyan Women. And I founded it because this coincided with the revolution of 2011. And at that time, we had so many phenomenal women doing everything. I mean, they were the backbone of the revolution. You could not get food, clothing, information, anything without women. And immediately when liberation occurred and processes were signed, women were excluded. They were told to go back to their traditional roles of, being a mother, being a teacher, being whatever that minimized role in society was. And a lot of it was cited under religious excuse. And having been raised in an Islamic religious family, I knew that wasn't true. because my dad had never once told me, you cannot accomplish or you cannot do. It was the exact opposite. We were taught that worship, the greatest form of worship, is work. That is what Islam teaches. You can pray, you can empathize, but your greatest form of worship is action. And so it is your responsibility as a Muslim to act. So it was my responsibility to be involved. It was my responsibility to be in charge. That was what my faith taught me. So following the Voice of Libyan Women, I began to notice more and more that all our global policies tend to be shaped in some way by faith, even in the most secular of countries, in the most a-religious spaces. Our social norms are dictated heavily on traditional faith interpretation. You can have debates in the United States today about reproductive rights and cite religion. You can invade a country and a president can cite religion in a secular country. The money still has "In God We Trust" written on it. Faith permeates every single space, and our expectations of women, our definition of women's roles, and the fact that we often ascribe them only to caregivers and mothers, and they can work in the social services, and the most important thing is whether or not she's reproduced. Those variables are often, underlied heavily by the way we've traditionally seen women, and the way we've traditionally seen women has been the way we've interpreted faith to see women. And it always confused me because, when I was growing up, I had my own different difficulties understanding the way in which faith was practiced on a community level in Saskatoon, where I was born. I would always wonder, why are women entering from the other door? Why is the prayer hall for women getting smaller? And my dad would say, don't see what people say about God, because people see God in their image. So go and read. Go and read about women leaders in faith. And so I started from the very beginning, because in Islam, and I think most people of a faith would agree, in Islam, God is infallible. God never makes a mistake. And God determined that the first convert to Islam would be a woman. And it was a woman who financed the Islamic faith. It was a woman who protected the Prophet in war, who fought in militaries. It was women who took care of the hadiths, the saying of the Prophet. It was put in their safekeeping. The Quran, the holiest book in Islam, was kept in the safekeeping of a woman. It was women on every level, economic, social, political, and military, dominated the very foundation of faith. Before human interpretation and influence could really permeate, it was women, which means that was God's work. God's work was that women go in side by side in war, and they come out side by side as leaders. And then men got involved. Don't get me started. But so that was the interpretation that I always took home with me. And that's what we see around the world today. So in my daily work, I don't lead a congregation, although I think I should lead many, but we'll talk. No. I don't lead a congregation. I don't lead a faith group. I do my daily work in global security and global health. So it seems very distant for many people from faith. But my faith impacts the way I operate in the world to an incredible degree. It allows for me to say that every single person needs to be part and parcel and partners at tables of decision making, be it if they are women, men, regardless of sexuality, race, gender, etc. That's what I've learned from my faith. And I think it makes me a better leader. I think it makes me much better at my job, that I have that insight and that I have that. And I think it's a shame that when I walk into rooms, there is nobody who looks like me there. And I think it's a shame that we don't actually start promoting that more within our faith communities. You can be a strong Muslim or Jewish or Christian woman. You don't necessarily have to be that in your synagogue, temple, or mosque. You can be that in front of the world. And that can be what you teach the world about your faith. That can be what your faith teaches you. Because I know people interact differently with me because I'm Muslim. I know, and it's made me smarter and stronger and a lot more diplomatic than I ever was before. But I think until we challenge those very tenets of global policy, until we challenge those rooms where global power is often defined by your gender or by the way you look, until we challenge the notion that human rights is a buffet and we can pick what we like for who we like when we want, then I don't think we're going to get very far ahead. And I think until we challenge the fact that our religious institutions are predominantly economic and political tools to manipulate populations into making certain decisions, we're going to lose a lot of the beauty of our faith communities. That is the reality, I think, for most people who are struggling with faith. And I struggle on a daily basis with organized religious institutions. I get the irony that I'm saying this in a synagogue, but I do. I question every time I hear somebody say we spoke to a Muslim spokesman or a Jewish who gave him permission to speak for me? I question every single time the ideals of my faith and the way my faith was taught to me by my parents does not fall in line with the political and economic realities of my religion. And believe me, for every major religion in the world, those are very often. And I think it's because we don't have women at those tables. So I'm going to close off by actually giving an anecdote. I never personally realized how important my faith was to me in my daily interactions until one day I was so nervous. I was going to give a really important speech in front of a lot of people, not the most, pro-me crowd. So I was super nervous, and I had nobody from my family there. And now in retrospect, I realize I get more nervous when my family's in the room, but at the time, I really needed some, so I texted my mother, and literally 5 minutes before, and I was like, Mom, I'm so terrified. This is my first big speech. And my mom responds to me, and she says, there is a prayer by the Prophet Moses. It's in our Quran. It's Allahumma yashrah li sadri, wa yassir li amri, wa halil aqudi min lisani, fawqa qawli, which basically means, may God open my chest, ease my path, unknot my tongue, so that they may understand me, right? And this was before Moses went to speak to the Pharaoh, which means it's gotta work for me, like in every situation. So I now say it almost 100 times before I speak. And it makes me it calms me down so much. So one day I went into a meeting and there was a plaque with Dr. Murabit on the table. And I sat in my seat after having said this, recited this, and I work with predominantly 65 to 70-year-old white men. So I'm pretty conspicuous in almost any room. And a complete side note, my dad was once asked, how do you raise your daughters this way? And he said, well, I raised them like white men, to just walk into any room. So fantastic. So whenever anybody asks me, if people say, how do I make my daughter? I'm like, raise her like a white man. She walks into any room, she's right. She knows what, it's all about the confidence. But anyway, so I walked into this room, and I sat in my seat, and a young intern, a young woman, actually came up to me and said, no, that's Dr. Murabit's seat, and we hear he's quite difficult. So you might want to take a seat back. And I thank my faith so much, because there were two ways I could have reacted to that. I am one of 11 children. I know what it's like to get a seat. And I know it's very difficult. And when you're in my family, you have to either talk loud or talk quick before you get cut off, right? So I've experienced this. So I knew I could react the way I would with my own siblings, which was like, who are you and what are you talking about? Or I could react the way in which my parents taught me, bless them, and the way my faith taught me, which was to put myself in her position and to understand and to realize that from her perspective, there has never been somebody who looked like me in that room. And that this was as new for her, and it was a learning opportunity for her as much as it was for me. So I think we talk about faith in these wonderful rooms, and faith is so far separated from our daily reality because a lot of it doesn't mesh anymore, because a lot of our religious institutions are old men who don't realize that you gotta reinterpret and you gotta re-embrace and you gotta accept that people don't look the way you want them to look and think the way you want them to think, but they can still believe in a very humble, kind, loving and merciful God. Thank you.